committee hearing. Today's topic will be the process for objecting to liquor permit renewals. Every year, as part of the liquor permit renewal process, the state of Ohio affords municipalities the opportunity to formally object to an establishment's permit renewal. The purpose of this hearing is to inform the residents of Columbus on the process and to initiate community involvement in the objection process. There will be an opportunity for public comment during tonight's proceedings. If you wish to speak, please fill out a speaker slip provided at the entrance of council chambers. I would now like to have Mr. William Sperlazza from the City Attorney's Office and Detective Alan Brown from the Columbus Division of Police share information regarding the renewal process and citizen participation in submitting objections. Mr. Sperlazza, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman Brown, for the opportunity to be here today. And I'd also like to thank your legislative assistant, Mr. Grant Ames, for all the good work and help he's done to get us up and running here today. There are 8 major steps to a permit renewal. Before I get into the steps, I want to give just a bit of an overview about the subject that we're going to talk about today. Liquor permits are issued by the state of Ohio. Every liquor permit in the state of Ohio has to apply for renewal at the end of the year. That goes for grocery stores, carryouts, bars, every liquor permit. At the end of the year, the municipality in which that permit resides has the opportunity to object to the renewal of that permit if there is substantial evidence that criminal activity is occurring at that permit premises. So what we're going to do today is go through the 8 major steps to a permit renewal objection. Those steps are identifying a problem establishment, investigating, evaluation, the city attorney's recommendation to council, council's resolution to the Division of Liquor Control, the public hearing, the division decision, and the appeals process. We will discuss each step individually. First step, identifying problem establishments. Letters have gone out from Chairman Brown's office to various area commissions, civic associations, block watches, and other residents of the city of Columbus, sort of summarizing the process. It also has contact information so that if any of those groups would like to speak with the city and recommend that liquor permit establishments be investigated, they can do so. The number one source for identifying problem establishments is, in fact, the community. This is the opportunity for the community to really get involved in the process and have their voice heard. Individuals can speak to their council member or to myself, the city attorney's office, area commissions, civic associations, block watches, and other neighborhood groups. The second source to identify problem establishments is law enforcement. City Council and the City Attorney's Office works very closely with the Columbus Police Department to determine who the liquor permit establishments are that have the most criminal activity occurring. But we also work with the Ohio Investigative Unit, the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, and certainly the Code Department, building, zoning. We bring a group of people to the table so that everybody's voice is heard and all the information and facts are out on the table before we make a decision. Our target establishments to object to are those that operate in a manner that demonstrates a disregard for the law. They are establishments that cause substantial interference with the public decency, sobriety, peace, and good order. And the key here is that we have substantial, reliable, and probative evidence that this is occurring. These types of objections do not occur on rumor or innuendo. We operate on facts and evidence, and we only move forward when we are sure that we can ethically do so. The second step is the investigation process. At this time, I am going to turn it over briefly to Detective Alan Brown, who is with us here today. He is the liaison officer with the Columbus Police Department, and Detective Alan Brown is going to discuss further the investigation process.
Thank you, Assistant City Attorney Sperlazza, Chairman Brown. The Vice Section of the Columbus Division of Police investigates laws and enforce laws regulating and pertaining to prostitution, human trafficking, gambling, criminal and administrative liquor violations, and related drug offenses. As Mr. Spaliza stated earlier, we only rely on probative and reliable information. Our investigations gather that information, and we then sit down and discuss that information, go over that information before we even present that information to council, so that we do not overtly penalize any business operating within the laws of the state of Ohio and the city of Columbus. The Vice Section is committed to improving the quality of life within the community. With an emphasis on community support, the Vice Section will continue to strive to improve our community by covertly and overtly enforcing laws and regulations. Through cooperative and collaborative efforts with the community and other governmental agencies, the Vice Section focuses on making Columbus a safer place to call home. If anyone has information concerning prostitution, human trafficking, gambling, criminal and administrative liquor violations, and related drug offenses, please contact the Vice Section at 614-645-4705. And at that time, a complaint will be taken. Your complaint will be forwarded to a supervisor. A supervisor will then, at that time, assign it to a detective for investigation. And through that process, we're able to gather the information to those liquor establishments that are violating the law, disturbing the peace and sobriety of the community, and then go forth with an objection. I thank you for your time.
Would you repeat that number again one more time, Detective Brown?
Yes, sir. 614-645-4705.
And is that number available 24/7 or 16 hours, or what's the timeline to which number is available?
Well, it's available basically 8 hours a day, but there's also a recording where our clerical will answer your phone calls, and if it requires a phone call back, they will assign it to a detective to give it back with that person and make sure that complaint is heard and investigated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Detective Brown, not only for that presentation, but for your hard work and dedication to this topic and to keeping our city safe. Thank you, sir. We move on now to step 3, evidence evaluation. This is a very important step in our mind. We will discuss later on some of the success the city of Columbus has had in the last 4 or 5 years throughout this process. And in my opinion, we are having that success because of our evidence evaluation step. Again, substantial, reliable, and probative evidence, strong, relevant evidence to support an objection. That's what we're looking for. This process typically begins near the end of the summer when myself, Detective Brown, other folks in the law enforcement agencies that we discussed earlier, we meet to evaluate the evidence that we have up to this point pertaining to liquor permit establishments that are having trouble with criminal activity. Once we develop a list of the preliminary bad actors, our group will then meet with Councilmember Brown and his staff to review the evidence we have thus far. That evidence will continue to be investigated throughout the summer into the fall and into the winter. What types of evidence are we looking for? Number one in our minds is criminal activity, and most prominently is violence. Those liquor permit establishments where we are having felony assaults, homicides, bar fights, domestic violence, shooting, stabbing, gun runs, things of that nature, the places that are causing harm to our neighborhoods and our business districts, those are the number one on our list. Drug activity, gun activity, prostitution activity, property crimes, buying and selling stolen property, food stamp fraud we even see here from time to time in liquor permit establishments. This is the type of evidence we're looking for as it pertains to criminal activity that we might then evaluate for a liquor permit objection. Secondly, liquor violations. This could be selling to an underage individual, selling alcohol to somebody under 21. This could be buying alcohol from an unauthorized source, or selling beyond the hours or times that your permit allows. But any sort of liquor violations are also very much considered in our evidence evaluation. The bottom line is we ask ourselves, how is this permit holder handling the privilege to hold this permit? And then finally, we do consider structural issues such as code violations, fire violations, building violations, health code violations if food and things of that nature are being sold. But all of those different types of evidence will go into consideration in the evaluation stage.
Mr. Spilazzo, a question
sir.
for you
Yes, sir.
and for Detective Brown. How often do we get complaints about underage purchasing of alcohol? Does that happen very frequently, or is it infrequent?
It's a frequent call that is received by the Narcotics Bureau Vice Section concerning underage sales, especially in some of our carry-out and convenient-type stores.
Now, would you be in uniform when you respond to those circumstances, Detective Brown, or would it be plain clothes?
It's usually a covert operation until the time of the issuance of the citation, and then at that time, the issuance of the citation is done by the Ohio Investigative Unit, who go in overtly, identify themselves with their state credentials, and issue the actual cite.
Now, would the underage individual, would he or she be held accountable for their engagement in this activity, or would be the parents, or who would be held accountable for that circumstance?
There's basically three types of laws here that we're looking at, two criminal and one administrative. First, there's the actual buyer. If the actual buyer is underage, then they can be criminally charged for purchasing. If the seller fails to properly identify that person, they can be charged for also selling to that underage minor. And then there's the administrative charge that goes against the permit itself.
And the seller is required to ask what specific question of an individual as far as ID is concerned?
First is to ask for ID. If a person looks anywhere under 30 years of age, they should look at the ID of that person and also ask that person, how old are you? And then go from there. But if the responsibility lies upon that person that's selling the alcohol to the person to ensure that that person is over the age of 21.
Now, a lot of these establishments, do they have video available to them? So if you go into a store, you can have access to the video, or it's just holding the person accountable that they ask the question appropriately?
Most of them do have video, but oftentimes we don't have, the law enforcement agency does not have direct access to that video. Oftentimes, sometimes these are recorded incidences where if the officer sends an undercover a informant in to buy, they may record that information to ensure that the store owner or operator is not being entrapped into a sale.
Exactly. Now, would a parent be able to call you and say, my 16-year-old is getting access to alcohol? How would you handle that?
That would be handled as a complaint. They would take the information down, time, location of the permit holder, and then that would be investigated by the detective.
Okay. So parents can feel comfortable to call you and express their concern that their child may be having access to alcohol, either knowingly or unknowingly, or for someone else, but they could be held accountable.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Spilazzo, please continue.
Thank you, sir. Our next step after evidence evaluation would be step 4, and that is the city attorney's recommendation to council. The Columbus City Attorney makes a recommendation to council in the form of a letter stating his belief that there is legally sufficient evidence to object to the renewal of a permit. And that happens for each and every permit that City Council considers for an objection. Step 5 is the council resolution. So just to recap, once the evidence has been evaluated and it has been decided which premises have that substantial legal evidence to move forward, the city attorney gives that recommendation to City Council, And then City Council considers each individual objection in the form of a resolution. So the objection to the permit renewal is in fact a resolution. The resolution itself is the objection. The resolutions formally presented to City Council typically happen in December of each year, but certainly near the end of each year. And those resolutions are voted on by Council. If the resolution passes, then the objection is then sent to the Ohio Division of Liquor Control, and a hearing is requested.
Mr. Peralta, if
Yes,
some particular establishment, a bad situation occurs, let's say, heaven forbid, a homicide, could we act more quickly to close it down rather than waiting till December?
As far as a liquor permit objection goes, we cannot act any quicker than this formal process that happens at the end of the year. Now, in a situation like that, we would hope to be able to utilize some different laws, in particular the Ohio Nuisance Abatement Code, to potentially go in there and forcibly close the establishment if we think that we have the appropriate evidence to do that. But unfortunately, as far as the permit objection process goes, it is not only something that occurs at the end of the year, but it's something that drags on significantly into the next year.
For the sake of clarity, again, for the viewing public and for those who are watching, that when something happens in an establishment and we can't close them down immediately because of the liquor permit process, but there are other avenues that one can pursue through vice and other elements in law enforcement to close down that establishment.
That is absolutely correct. And I will tell you that the Columbus City Attorney's Office, in conjunction with the Columbus Police Department, is very experienced in utilizing the Nuisance Abatement Code to close down such properties. And we do it often whenever the law allows, whenever we can ethically move forward. So those types of complaints are very important to us. They're the ones that are at the top of our list. And we review those situations not only in a liquor permit objection vein and not only in a nuisance abatement vein, but in every way possible to abate that nuisance and to keep that community and that business district safe.
And if I was in a particular community from a nuisance perspective and there's lots of loitering going around, there's lots of folks hanging out in front of this particular establishment, maybe Detective Brown might be able to speak to this question more clearly. Is there anything that can be done, or we just have to leave those people alone who are loitering around in front of the establishment and we think they're having a negative impact on that particular establishment or on the community?
Yes, sir. I believe this is a combination of things where the community and the police can work together. The store owners, community, and police should be able to work together to solve that problem. If the community and the store owners let the police know, hey, this is a problem, I'm willing to work with you and to help you, then the patrol units can operate and deal with those issues. It's just when one of those elements are missing, then that becomes a very difficult thing to operate, but not impossible.
Well, it involves a cooperative element with the store owner, the community, and law enforcement if they think that that is becoming a problem because folks are hanging out in front of the establishment. But collectively, we can be effective to try and deal with solving the problem.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And in my experience and opinion, it's when that collaborative effort is missing the store owner or store manager piece, that's when we end up having larger problems, and that's when these processes need to take place. But in my experience, store owners and property owners who are engaged and want to work with law enforcement and with the city, we tend to have success there that doesn't require this type of activity. So I do want to take a minute before I move off of step 4 and 5 to talk about what I think is a very important distinction. I mentioned it earlier, I'm going to mention it again. Once the City of Columbus passes these resolutions and these objections occur, please note that the city does not decide who gets a permit and who doesn't get a permit. The city decides whether or not to object to the renewal of that permit. It's the state of Ohio who ultimately decides who gets a permit and who doesn't, what permit is renewed and what permit isn't renewed. And that's through their Department of Commerce Division of Liquor Control. So I know it's often a misconception that folks think that the city gets to decide who gets a permit and who doesn't. In fact, the city simply decides what permit may or may not be objected to.
Mr. Peralta,
Yes, sir.
I think that's a very important point. So would you restate that for the community? Because
Absolutely.
I think there's confusion sometimes because an establishment has a liquor permit in a particular community, they want it closed down, or they want to object to it. We have a process for that, but it is issued by the state.
Absolutely. The Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Liquor Control is the entity that renews permits, that offers liquor permits, that issues liquor permits. The City of Columbus does not. And it can be confusing because there are a lot of permits that the city does issue, but liquor permits is not one of them. And we have certainly had some unfortunate instances, luckily very few, where the city has objected to a permit. We did not want it, yet the division overruled our objection and gave a permit anyways. It's ultimately up to the state, but we will do our best to persuade the state to see our point of view.
Is there such a circumstance where the community, again, as Detective Brown has already brought up, if they say we have too many establishments in our community right now that have liquor permits?
Mm-hmm. There are, to begin, what we call saturation is also an issue that we can discuss during some particular types of objections. So if an area has a large number of permits and a new permit is seeking to sort of shoehorn its way into that sea of existing permits, then we can object to a new permit and ask the division to consider the fact that that area is overly saturated with permits at this point. Secondly, and perhaps more effectively, there have been situations where a neighborhood can, for lack of a better phrase, vote itself dry, where they can take up the initiative, get some signatures, and forgive me, I don't have the process down pat, but essentially they can vote as a neighborhood to seek their neighborhood to be dry, and by that I mean not issue liquor permits to anybody. That has been successful here and there. And again, I apologize, it's not a process that I am overly familiar with, but I know it is a process that exists and has had some limited success in the City of Columbus.
Well, certainly with Detective Brown's engagement, if a community feels that they are being saturated with establishments with liquor permits, again, that collaboration we had just talked about earlier would have a major impact, and certainly be able to communicate to the state that we think this area, based on the complaints by the community, that it is being saturated with liquor permits, and ask that this one not be granted. Would that be correct, Detective?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So now we will move on to steps 6 and 7. Step 6 is a public hearing at the division. So as you recall, we're at the point now where the city has formally objected. We have passed that objection on to the Division of Liquor Control. At that point, the Division of Liquor Control will schedule a hearing. They typically start in about February. So for this year, to use it as an example, we would do our objections around December of 2016. Our hearings will start roughly around February of 2017, but they'll be scheduled out at the division's convenience. At those hearings, they are held at the Division of Liquor Control. That is a statewide office. It's right off of Bryce Road, technically in Reynoldsburg. The hearing is held in front of a hearing officer. So it's not a judge, it's a hearing officer who works for the Division of Liquor Control. At that point, I, on behalf of the city attorney, represent the City of Columbus and City Council at that hearing. What does that mean? That means that I present the evidence on behalf of our objection to the hearing officer at the Division of Liquor Control. The permit holder may be present at this hearing, may present evidence at this hearing, and often they will hire attorneys to do that on their behalf as well. And I would say that the overwhelming majority of permit objections that result in a hearing are hearings where either the permit holder is there, the permit holder's attorney is there, or both. At these hearings, again, as I mentioned, I present the evidence to the Division of Liquor Control, and those types of evidence typically include law enforcement testimony, where we will have actual police officers. Detective Brown testifies quite a bit as our liaison and does a fantastic job of doing so. But we will also have patrol officers or undercover detectives who are familiar with the criminal activity at a particular establishment. They will testify on behalf of the city. We also have citizens testify quite a bit. These can be folks who live in the neighborhood. These can be folks who are involved in civic associations or block watches or area commissions who who want to testify to the division that they don't want this permit in their neighborhood, and they can give the reasons to do so. Oftentimes, we will also present as evidence documents, letters from area commissions, letters from civic associations, maybe petitions signed by folks in the neighborhood. We do our best to make sure the division understands that if the neighborhood wants this permit to go away, we do our best to make the division understand they don't want this permit renewed, and here's exactly specifically why. So those folks' voices will always be heard at these hearings. Also, in addition to testimonial evidence, paper evidence, reports from the police department, the aforementioned letters and petitions from civic associations, et cetera, but also court documents. We'll get certified conviction entries and things of that nature pertaining to convictions from criminal activity occurring at the property. So essentially, a lot of paper evidence, reports, court documents, and a lot of testimonial evidence from police officers, but also from citizens, and from time to time, folks from the Ohio Investigative Unit, folks from Code, Health, Building, whenever that subject arises. After the hearing, not on the day of the hearing, unfortunately, but some point after the hearing, the Division of Liquor Control will make a decision. Unfortunately, those decisions are becoming longer and longer to come by. When I personally first started in this process in about 2012, you would typically see a decision come about 30 days after the hearing. Unfortunately, we're at a pace right now where the division doesn't give us a result until about 6 months. And I'll talk a little bit about the ramifications of that, but unfortunately, that's something that we're dealing with, and our voices have been heard at the division as it pertains to the idea that we would like these decisions to come quicker. But at the end of the day, again, as I've emphasized several times throughout this presentation, it's the state of Ohio who's in control of this process, not the city of Columbus.
If I may, before you go forward,
Yes, sir.
Detective, what impact does it have for you when they've had a hearing and it takes 6 months to actually get a decision?
Could you repeat the question, sir?
What impact does it have for law enforcement when the timeline for a decision takes at least 6 months from the hearing? So if you have a hearing in January, you don't find out the results of that hearing until June, but the community still has to deal with that particular establishment. Does that have an impact for you from a law enforcement perspective?
I believe so, sir. It's a constant thing where it's hard to get information from the community when they don't see results. And so a lot of times they won't speak about this, or they will over-speak about it, complain about it more and more, and see no results coming. Another problem, I believe, that comes as a result of it is that we have to continue to press forth on the objection. If 6 months pass, then we're getting into the next objection year, and we have to reinvestigate that same establishment, and it's just a time-consuming process for us to reinvestigate the same place over and over again, and then to go before council, have a resolution drawn up again on the same place and the same problem, just to keep that complaint active. So it has a negative effect on our man-hours spent on any given location.
And would you agree that the community is upset with local law enforcement because they haven't closed the place down or taken away the liquor license?
That is true. Oftentimes they question our desire to help them. And I can tell you, after doing this for about 10 years, there's a great desire to help our community and deal with these problems, but we have to do it according to the laws of the state of Ohio and wait patiently until they give us results.
Thank you, Detective.
And Chairman Brown, if I might just add on to that, I think one of the biggest issues with delay in the division's decision is that when we object to the permit, that permit operator gets to continue to operate throughout the pendency of the case, the pendency of the objection. So, while we're going through the hearing process and the waiting for a decision process, they're still able to sell alcohol. And that's what's very frustrating to us in this process. And to me, that's where that causes the biggest problem in our minds.
And if I may, what would you suggest that I do, what can I do to try and speak to the state to help expedite this particular process? Yeah. In urban communities, when we have this problem, as Detective Brown has already pointed out, it poses all kinds of other problems. And now, I don't know if it's a staffing issue or there's a process that is delaying results, but clearly 6 months is an extremely long period of time to get an answer.
And I know personally, and I think I can speak on behalf of the city attorney, our office would be happy to collaborate with you to find the best way possible to communicate our concerns to the Division of Liquor Control and the Department of Commerce and see what we can do about just getting a decision sooner. It's not that we're necessarily asking them to rule in our favor or not in our favor. We're saying just give us a decision. I mean, give us the decision, give us the right decision, and if we have to appeal it one way or the other, and we'll discuss the appeals process in a minute, we will, but it's frustrating to not have a decision sooner, that's for sure.
Well, we'll be more than happy to do that. I'm deeply concerned when it deals with the law enforcement, and they have to endure the attitude of the community saying, we brought this to you, but we can't seem to get anything done, and the only person that they go after is local law enforcement. That's not appropriate. When they say, we've done what we can do, it's the state, and for the citizens to know what they can or cannot bring to the table. So between this office and certainly the city attorney's office, we can attempt to try and not put pressure, but certainly ask them to be a little more conscientious with regards to these complaints as they present themselves from the city.
Thank you, sir. So after the hearing, after the decision is issued, we will get to step 8, the final step, and that is the appeals process. The aggrieved party, whichever side, for lack of a better phrase, doesn't win. So, for example, if the division sustains our objection, so they agree with our objection and they decide not to renew the permit, then the permit holder has 30 days to perfect an appeal. At the 30-day mark, if they don't file an appeal, that permit terminates just like that, and they can no longer sell alcohol. All right. If they file an appeal, that appeal first goes to the Liquor Control Commission. Now, this slide gives us a 4-level look at the potential for appeals, but in all reality, there's only one practical level that I have seen, and that is the first level to the Liquor Control Commission. I have handled maybe 70 or 80 of these cases in the last couple of years. I can't recall how many. I've never seen a case be appealed beyond the Liquor Control Commission. However, it is plausible that if somebody doesn't like the decision at the Liquor Control Commission level, it could then go to Common Pleas Court. After Common Pleas Court, it would go to the 10th District Court of Appeals, and potentially from there on to the Ohio Supreme Court. But I cannot stress enough that if a case is appealed, it typically ends at the Liquor Control Commission level. If an objection is sustained and it is appealed to the Liquor Control Commission, at that point, the Attorney General's office actually represents the state at that appeals hearing. And if you think about it, it's the Division of Liquor Control, a state entity, who decided to sustain the objection. So the state is going to defend its decision in front of the Liquor Control Commission. So it's actually the Attorney General that would represent our interests at that time, and I certainly do everything I can to advise them and forward all of the evidence that we have to them. And I know our law enforcement officials, including Detective Brown and the police department, will work hard to give the Attorney General the appropriate evidence to win our appeal. If the case is overruled at the Division of Liquor Control stage, then the city can appeal to the Liquor Control Commission as well. And we have done that once or twice in my time. At that point, I would again go up to the Liquor Control Commission, and I would represent the city's interest if we are the aggrieved party. But the key here, in my opinion, is if an objection is sustained by the Division of Liquor Control, if, for lack of a better word, we win at the division level, then once that appeal is filed within 30 days, that permit holder is also going to file for what we call a stay. Essentially, they're going to ask the Liquor Control, hey, during the pendency of my appeal, can I continue to sell alcohol on my permit? We, as the City of Columbus, object to those stays aggressively. Unfortunately, again, it's up to the Liquor Control Commission to decide whether or not to grant the stay. We have had some frustrating times where they have gone ahead and granted the stay and allowed the establishment to continue selling during the pendency of the appeal. But we have also had a good number of stays that were denied based on our objection to the denial. And we will continue to be diligent in that regard and make sure that those stays are objected to when we can ethically and legally do so.
Mr. Velazquez,
Yes, sir.
wouldn't it be as another process to say, all right, you can't sell during the appeal process depending upon the outcome? Why would it be we let you continue to operate depending on the outcome? Is that the American way or what?
Well, it's certainly the Liquor Control Commission's way. They offer the opportunity to stay the suspension of the license pending appeal, and I suppose it's not indifferent. Sometimes in a criminal case, if an individual is convicted in the criminal courts, the defendant through the defense attorney wish to appeal the decision, they can also apply for a stay of any sentence in a criminal case, be it a jail sentence or a fine or things of that nature. So it's certainly probably reflective of that process. But again, I think the good news is we have an opportunity to object to that stay,
Yes.
and we are successful enough that typically we get that stay objected to and at least stop that permit holder from selling while they're appealing. But sometimes we don't, and it can be frustrating. And I don't know that there's a grand answer to it other than to continue to be diligent, continue to do the job correctly, and hope that the powers that be with the state of Ohio do the right thing.
What's significant about that is educating the public. The public doesn't know all the circumstances, and unless Detective Brown happens to know at an area commission meeting or some other meeting, this is what's going on to try and generate interest. Otherwise, again, this is where local law enforcement takes all the brunt of the angst on the part of the community. If I'm incorrect, Detective, please tell me.
Yeah, you are correct. On many occasions, I've had the opportunity to go to community commissions and community groups and explain the process to them and let them know that it's a slow process, but if we have the evidence and we're persistent, we shall usually prevail.
Thank you.
I would also mention before I finish up the appeals process slide is that the Liquor Control Commission is a 3-member panel that will hear the evidence for both sides and make a decision. And I am happy to report that they tend to issue their decisions in a timely manner.
Okay.
All right, so we'll move on now that we're done with steps. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about the possible outcomes of an objection to a liquor permit renewal. First here on the list is what we will call objection sustained. This is a scenario where the renewal goes all the way to the Division of Liquor Control hearing. We have a hearing scheduled, and the hearing proceeds. The division comes back in our favor, sustaining our objection. That means the permit is revoked and the liquor establishment must no longer sell alcohol. Now they can still, and it does say closed up there, but they can still operate. They just can't sell alcohol.
Yes.
Right? And to be frank, that tends to cripple most liquor permit holders. Objection overruled. These are somewhat rare in my opinion, but once in a while the division decides to overrule the city of Columbus's objection. And if that's the case, then that permit's allowed to be renewed and they're allowed to do business as usual. The permit forfeited is sort of an umbrella term. I like to call this raising the white flag, but sometimes permit holders see our objection and decide, you got me, I don't want to go to hearing, we forfeit our permit. We, for lack of a better term, consider those wins because the goal here is not to have the permit renewed. And just like in a sustained objection, that permit is not renewed. So we've achieved our goal of getting that permit out of our neighborhood, out of our business district. And then, of course, we always have the appeals as a partial outcome, and we talked about the appeals. I want to take a minute and just go through a few common questions that folks tend to have. Number one, what does having the permit forfeited or revoked really mean? What is the result? Well, if it's forfeited or revoked, that means, like I said, that permit is terminated. You can't sell alcohol there anymore. And I mentioned this earlier, but Again, that doesn't mean the store's boarded up or closed up. They can still sell food, they can still potentially sell tobacco, they can still sell lottery tickets, they can still be a restaurant, whatever that may be. Again, we have found overwhelmingly that the loss of a liquor permit tends to cripple. It's stopping their ability to sell alcohol, and that typically is the source of all of the problems. Number two, can a new liquor establishment open up in the same location? So let's say we have a permit forfeited or an objection sustained. Can a new permit holder then go into that property, acquire a new permit, and open up shop? As with most questions pertaining to the law, the answer is it depends. When the division decides on an objection hearing, they are also deciding on something called a Rule 8 decision. And essentially that decision means, in addition to sustaining the city's objection, are we going to go ahead and say, also for a full year, no permit can go into this property unless you come to us and give us a good reason to allow one in there. So we feel very fortunate that that exists. It's just another sort of layer, another sort of net that allows the Division of Liquor Control to go above and beyond and say, we're not allowing any permit there unless you come in and really prove to us that you're worthy of it. Another layer of protection is that if a new permit request comes in, the city is given notice of that, and I'm sure Council Member Brown has seen those on the agendas. I review every one of those for every council meeting. I send those out to all of our friends in law enforcement to make sure everybody sees the names and the properties and the people involved. And the city gets an opportunity to object to that.
Yes.
So then we can go in front of the Division of Liquor Control and say, whoa, 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 we just had a permit forfeited from this property, and now a day, a week, a month later, here comes a new person that wants to put a permit in that property. We don't think you should allow that, and here's why. So if we have the evidence to do that, we do that quite a bit, and we've certainly ramped up those efforts, in my opinion, in the last couple of years. Next question, what happens to the establishments during the objection process? I mentioned this earlier in response to a comment by Chairman Brown, but I do want to distinguish. During the pendency of the objection, so from the point that that the city votes on the resolution to object to the permit, all the way until the division makes a decision, that permit holder is allowed to operate. They need to have their day in court, so to speak. It is an administrative hearing, but they have to have their day of a hearing and of evidence before their permit's terminated. However, like I said, during the appeal, we can ask that permit holder not be able to operate during the pendency of the appeal. I know I discussed the stay situation. So,
Mr. Spilazzo, question
Yes,
also. So if Joe Smith has his license revoked in one location but chooses to open up in another location, do we phone by name so that we know whether or not this person's been a bad actor in one spot? Chances are he's going to be a bad actor someplace else.
I have two answers to that question. The first answer is our interpretation of Ohio law is that if it is shown that a permit holder has acted in such a manner that he deserves to have a permit terminated, then his activity at one permit location should be considered when deciding whether or not to renew his permit at any permit location he owns. So we have sort of developed a system where we try to be thorough, and if Joe Schmo, as you said, has multiple permits, but has one or two of those permits that are particularly bad places, I would be inclined to object to all of them. Show all of the bad evidence that this permit holder has kind of put upon the city and his neighborhood, and then ask the division, this gentleman is not fit to have a permit anywhere in the state of Ohio. It's back to that. How has he handled the privilege to have a permit with the state of Ohio? That's the argument we make. And from time to time, it's successful, particularly if we can show that there is some criminal activity occurring at all of the permits. My second part answer to that is, let's say that this permit holder only had one permit, and we are successful in having their permit terminated. Yes. And then down the line, the same individual comes and applies for a new permit. Again, those are the ones we see on the council's agenda that get run by my eyes in my office, that I send to all our folks in law enforcement that are experienced in this. When we see that, we would be very likely to object to that permit and go in front of the division and say, we object to this permit and we want you to sustain our objection for all the same reasons you sustained our last objection, because this individual has demonstrated that he's not fit to hold a permit.
Detective Brown, any comments?
Yes, sir. That's Assistant City Attorney Spalaza is correct. A lot of times what would happen is that that same person would try to open another permit somewhere else, and that only causes the same, usually results in the same problems occurring there. And it deals with his fitness to operate. So we try to investigate it from that reason. When Assistant Attorney Spalaza contacts us, we run a records check on that person, make sure that person is not involved in any activities that would disqualify them, and then go forward from there.
Thank you.
So now that we've discussed sort of the process from stem to stern, we'll talk just a little bit about our results and how we've done in the last few years, and then we can move for any other further questions. This slide represents objections that were made in December 2012 and when all the hearings were held in in 2013. We objected to 9 total permit establishments, and 7 of those we would consider victories where the permit was not renewed. That could be because we went to hearing and our objection was sustained, or it can be because they waved the white flag and forfeited the permit. And then 2 of our objections were overruled. So in kind of sports parlance, we are 7-2 that year.
One question.
Yes, sir.
When you get overruled, what usually is the rationale behind the process of overruling you? We didn't do our homework, or what happens?
You're asking the wrong guy.
Okay.
When our objections are overruled, we tend to, I think I can speak for Detective Brown, and when I say we tend to be, pretty frustrated. And that's because we take a lot of pride in our evaluation process. We only operate on facts and evidence. We only move forward when we have good cases. So why would the division overrule an objection that we think is a good objection, strongly legally based, probative, substantial evidence? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I know sometimes the permit holders will come in and say, we're going to do a lot better. We're going to do some training. We're going to buy machines where we have to slide IDs through to make sure you're 21 every time. We fired the folks who were causing the criminal activity. A litany of defenses. We've probably seen them all. And from time to time, the division rules against us, but not often, as I will talk a little bit about the end.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next slide here are the objections that City Council voted on December of 2013. So we call these the 2014 objections. We objected to 14 permits, and we were fortunate enough to go 13-1, so to speak, that year. 13 permits forfeited or terminated, 1 objection overruled. And then finally, our 2015 objections. These objections were voted on December of 2014, and the administrative hearings occurred in 2015. This was a big year for us. We objected to 26 total permits, and 20 of them we were successful. So we were 20-6 that particular time. So that was a good year. I will tell you, sir, that since I became involved in this process about the middle of 2012 through today, we are operating at about 80% success clip. That is to say that of all the permits that City Council votes on and that are objected to, that 80% of those permits are not renewed. Either the objections are sustained or the permits are forfeited. So we think that's a pretty good batting average, so to speak. And again, that's not because whenever the city objects, the division sustains. It's not as simple as that. I do take a lot of pride in the process that we've put together in working with gentlemen like Detective Brown and other men and women with the police department and other law enforcement agencies. I think we do a very thorough job of looking through the evidence and picking the bad apples out of the bunch, so to speak. So our 80% clip so far is something that we're pretty proud of. But again, that's no magic at the administrative hearing level. That's the work we put in during the evaluation process when we meet with your office to make sure that we are doing the right thing ethically and legally.
And am I clear, also the board changes periodically, right? I mean, the board members that make the rulings?
The hearing officer at the Division of Liquor Control level, the initial administrative
Yes.
hearing level, has been the same gentleman for some time. But the Liquor Control Commission, I do believe, yes, that board fluctuates.
Yes.
And, but that, primarily, that's not who we deal with. But certainly the hearing officer at the division level has been the same gentleman for a long time. And I think, by and large, gives us a pretty fair shake at a good hearing.
Well, you guys have stamped a real good history, so yes.
All right. So that's all I have today. Chairman Brown, thank you for the time. And certainly Detective Brown and I are here to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Detective Brown, any other questions or any other comments, sir?
No, sir.
Since we do not have any speakers at this particular time, this will conclude the public hearing for review process for objecting to liquor permit renewals. I'd like to thank Mr. Bill Spalazzo from the City Attorney's Office and Detective Brown from the Columbus Division of Police, as well as my staff, Denise Foster and Grant Ames, for their assistance in the hearing process. I would also like to thank the engaged citizens for being a part of this process. As you heard from Detective Brown, the system only works well when the citizens engage with law enforcement along with the particular proprietor to try and deal with problems, to weed out those who do not want to be a positive influence within the community. Thank you very much, and that concludes this hearing.